gentlemen, welcome to the ZOA's Superstar Gala, the annual Louis D. Brandeis Award dinner. It's a little difficult to shake off those feelings of sadness to celebrate, especially when we're confronted daily by the murderous butchery of radical Islamists. Yes, it is in the name of Islam all over the world. But especially when our Jewish brothers and sisters are mowed down on the streets of Israel. We are sad, but we are also angry, as I know many of you are. When American citizens all over the world are murdered by vicious terrorists, they are acknowledged by our government and mourned publicly in the media. But when Jews like the young student Ezra Schwartz, Hashem Yikom Damo, are savagely gunned down in Israel, for days the silence, as Prime Minister Netanyahu has said in another context, the silence is deafening. Is Jewish blood not as red? Are we expendable victims? The hypocrisy of the world is appalling. Baruch Hashem, Ambassador Shapiro, and ultimately the State Department, after several days, reached out to the family. Yes, our world continues to be filled with many challenges, but we at the ZOA must not despair. As the premier and oldest Zionist organization in America, we stand shoulder to shoulder with our brethren in Israel. Last month, Mort Klein, Liz Burney, Sharona Whistler, Kevin Ross, and I, with many others, served as delegates to the World Zionist Organization at the World Zionist Congress in Jerusalem. Mort generously asked me to chair a resolutions committee where we presented and ultimately got passed a resolution for the first time stating that the Jewish people are the indigenous people of Israel. We are not interlopers, we are not colonialists, we are not occupiers, we are the Aboriginal people of this land, and we are here to stay.
In this week's Torah portion, we read of a dream that Jacob had 3,500 years ago. He dreamt of a ladder with its top reaching to heaven and its feet planted in the ground. Angels were ascending and descending. He awoke and said, "Surely God is in this place." That place was Jerusalem. The dream still lives. It lives in the students of Yeshiva University. I take them wherever I go. It lives in the students of Yeshiva University, the nation's only Zionist university, who dream of a life of peace, wholeness, and meaning for the Jewish people in Israel and in the diaspora. It lives in the hearts of the people of Israel, who pursue safety and security while yearning for justice and peace. It lives in the young men and women of the Israel Defense Forces, who invest their lives to protect their brothers and sisters, our children and grandchildren. The dream lives in the spirit of the Jewish people who yearn for peace in their homeland, to pursue their mission of being Or LaGoyim, a light unto the nations. And the dream lives in the commitment of the Zionist Organization of America, which struggles nobly against hatred, against violence, against extremism, against anti-Semitism and tyranny, to ensure the dream of Medinat Yisrael. But ladies and gentlemen, the only way to make a dream come true is to wake up. 3,500 years after Jacob stood on what was to be the Temple Mount, visionary leaders in this community created Birthright to reconnect our people with their homeland and advance the Jewish story. On the first Birthright trip in the year 2000, I escorted 600 college students to the Kotel at midnight. I prepared them. They'd never been before. They had no idea what to expect. They spent 20 minutes at the Kotel. As they were getting back on their buses, a girl on my bus asked if she could address her friends on the bus once we got going. I said, sure. And she stood up and she said, you know, when I walked over to the wall, I was surprised at how smooth the stones were. And I realized they had been caressed by the hands of our grandparents, by the tears of our great-grandparents. But when I looked higher on the wall, I saw that the stones were jagged. They were all very jagged. So I think we have to reach higher. So ladies and gentlemen, may God give us the strength and inspiration to reach higher, to support ZOA and all those who sustain the nation and the people of Israel. Mazel tov.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Mr. Lippman, for that kind introduction and for the warm welcome. My friend, I can say it, Mort, my friend, Mort Klein, thank you for hosting us. This wonderful event today is amazing. And thank you for the important work you do day in, day out for the people of Israel. I would like to offer my congratulations to my friend and colleague, Ambassador Ron Dermer. Ron. Ron, I know standing up for Israel can be tough, but trust me, it is much easier in Washington, D.C., than the UN in New York. To Sheldon and Mary Edelson, the work the two of you have done is truly remarkable. I have seen firsthand, as a Deputy Minister of Defense, I have seen the impact on the young students when they come to Israel on birthright. Your generosity will have an impact on generations of Jews in Israel and in the US. Mr. Jack Halperin, you have a lot of energy to support the people of Israel, and we are thankful for that. My friends from the West Coast, Mr. Bob Shillman and Mr. Myron Zimmerman, who are both of them bold and proud supporters of Israel. The one and only, Mr. Jon Voight. John, for decades you have been a voice of reason, of justice and decency. Your unwavering morality and support for the state of Israel is amazing, and I support you and I thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be here tonight with you, with the honorees, and with many, many very good friends. I have to apologize. Some of you told me why you haven't called us when you came to New York. But it is a challenging position in the UN, and I'm very happy to see all of you tonight. As Israel's new ambassador to the UN, I would like to talk about the challenges we face in the UN. On a personal note, I have to tell you, I have been here only 6 weeks. It feels like 6 years. Before I even finished unpacking, and my wife Tali is here to acknowledge that, I have had to deal with an emergency session of the Security Council, an initiative to send observers to the Temple Mount, and a proposal to declare the Kotel Ma'aravi, the Western Wall, a Muslim holy site. For most countries, this kind of intense activity would be a major crisis. For Israel, Mr. Shoeg, it is just another day in the UN. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, the people of Israel are facing a difficult time. A tide of terror has washed over our beloved country. Everyone is a target, men and women, young and old. Last Thursday in Tel Aviv, a Palestinian man working in Israel launched a stabbing attack against Israelis and brutally murdered 2 men on their way to the synagogue. On the same day, 3 people, an Israeli, an American, and a Palestinian, were ambushed and killed in Gush Etzion. And only a few hours ago, Adas Bukris, Hashem Mikom Dama, was stabbed to death in that same junction. 16 Israelis have been killed in attacks involving knives, vehicles, and guns since the beginning of October. The intention of the terrorists is very clear, is to make us feel unsafe in our own cities, on our own streets. But let me assure you tonight, if our enemies are testing our resolve, they will fail. Israelis are strong and we will prevail. We have overcome suicide bombings and rockets, and we will overcome this cruel campaign of stabbings and stonings. Ladies and gentlemen, the real test is for the international community. Will they stand with Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East? Unfortunately, I think we all know the answer to this question. Why does the UN call on, quote, both sides to show restraint and refers to terrorism as a cycle of violence? Let me be clear on it. There is no cycle of violence. There is only one side that is instigating violence and attacking Israelis for no reason other than the fact that they are Jews living in their historic homeland. Instead of holding the Palestinians accountable, many in the UN want to reward them with flags, ceremonies, and favors. President Abbas incites his people using inflammatory rhetoric, and the UN responds with more emergency sessions and more resolutions against Israel. When Abbas tells his people, quote, we welcome every drop of blood spilled in Jerusalem, the UN is silent. When he lies about Israel's intentions on the Temple Mount and says that Israel intends to make Al-Aqsa Jewish in order to spark violence, France decides it wants to send international observers to the Temple Mount. Let me be clear. We will not allow an international presence on Har HaBayit, on Temple Mount. The Temple Mount is the heart of Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, our eternal united capital. Just 2 weeks ago, the EU, the European Union, adopted a decision to label products from Israel. This is a biased and unjust act, and we will make sure that this shameful decision will be repealed. This obsession, it is an obsession, with Israel is not only harmful to Israel, it distracts the international community from the rest of the region. Last year, the UN General Assembly adopted 20 resolutions criticizing Israel. 20. In comparison, for all the atrocities being committed in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and around the world, the UN passed 3 resolutions condemning states for their actions. Yes, you heard me right. 20 resolutions against Israel and only 3 for the rest of the world combined. but let's be optimistic tonight. Israel remains a lighthouse in the middle of the storm, a beacon of stability, freedom, and democracy, standing firm against the waves of violence, hatred, and intolerance. In short, 67 years, together, all of us, we have built an amazing country. In less than 7 decades, we have gone from making the deserts bloom to launching advanced satellites into outer space. We have transformed a country dependent on small-scale agriculture into a global powerhouse of technology and innovation. None of this would be possible without the unshakable bond between the State of Israel and the Jewish communities around the world. Without the support of the Zionist Organization of America, Israel will not be at the place we are all so proud of today. I am grateful, and I want to thank you. To thank you for your unconditional love for the people of Israel, for your unconditional support for the State of Israel. Together with that love, with that support, we will prevail. Thank you.
We applaud your promoting proud and courageous policies for our beloved Jewish state. We commend your principled stand on the Jewish right to live in Judea and Samaria. Your campaigns have mobilized Christian Zionist support for Israel, which is very important, and your powerful and moral positions inspire all of us. Congratulations.
We at the ZOA are committed to making sure that Jewish students are afforded the kind of learning environment that every single student deserves, a campus that is welcoming, respectful, and safe. But I have to tell you, our job at the ZOA is getting more and more challenging. You've just heard from my colleague, Zach Stern, a few minutes ago. He told you a little bit about the hate group on campus that calls itself Students for Justice in Palestine, or SJP. Based on this group's words and its actions, it's clear that the SJP's goal is not about securing justice for the Palestinian Arabs. The SJP's goal and focus is on bashing Israel and bashing Jews. Recently, the SJP's conduct has accelerated to a whole other level that is truly frightening. On at least 3 campuses, UC Berkeley, Brooklyn College, and Hunter College, the SJP has actually called for an intifada. Everyone in this room knows what an intifada is. The SJP is inciting a terror war against Jews, calling for violence against us. At Berkeley, the SJP rally, the SJP leader riled up the crowd at an anti-Israel rally, chanting, "Intifada, intifada, we support the intifada." You can see the chanting on video. It is absolutely chilling. Within minutes of the chanting at this rally, a Jewish student at Berkeley was actually physically assaulted. Ironically, this student came from France. He came here to study in America, where he thought he'd be safe from anti-Semitism. This kind of hatred and bigotry is simply unacceptable. It is unacceptable for any Jewish student to feel afraid or unwelcome on his or her college campus. The ZOA has been calling on college administrators to address this serious problem by doing 2 basic things. First, college officials must publicly condemn the SJP and its actions. This group must be publicly condemned for creating a hostile campus environment for Jewish students. Second, college administrators must enforce their own rules and policies. If the evidence shows that the rules have been violated, then the SJP and individual SJP members must be held accountable. They must be punished. They must be punished in the same way that every other student and student group would be and should be if they violated the rules. In fact, we are seeing colleges and universities that they are cracking down hard, at least when other groups are targeted. We at the ZOA are fighting hard to make sure that college administrators respond with the same force and the same vigor to hatred and bigotry expressed against Jews. The double standard has got to stop. Jewish students have the same right as every other student to a learning environment that is welcoming, respectful, and safe. We at the ZOA could not do our work without the support of all of the wonderful students who stand up so proudly on their campuses as Jews and advocates for Israel. So many of you are here tonight. I thank you so much. It is our honor to work with you. It's also an honor to work with the campus professionals who stand up strongly for students and for Israel. Some of you are also here tonight. Thank you so much for everything you're doing, and thank you all for supporting our work here at the ZOA.
It's my honor and my privilege to present ZOA's prestigious and historic Louis Brandeis Award to Mr. Jack Halpern. Jack Halpern is a distinguished businessman and philanthropist whose support for Israeli and Jewish causes know no limits. He has extraordinary connections throughout the world, using them to benefit our people and Israel. He's very active on Capitol Hill, meeting with members of Congress regularly and supporting those who understand the importance of a strong Israel. He is the father of the US-Israel Alternative Fuels Cooperation Act and the Energy Independence Task Force. His special interests include alternative fuels and energy sources for transportation. Jack Halpern organized a major conference on ecofuels, on biofuels, which brought Israel's 13 leading biofuel scientists to Washington and to the US national laboratories. Jack has had a long-time association with Israel Bonds, the JCC of Manhattan, the Holocaust Resource Foundation, the Technion, and the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel. Jack Halpern has spent his life to ensure that never again will the Jews be silent in the wake of threats to our people. It is my special pleasure, on behalf of the ZOA, to present to you, Mr. Jack Halpern, the prestigious Louis D. Brandeis Award for Distinguished Achievement on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people. Jack Halpern.
Thank you, Mort, and good evening. Friends, it's no secret that the U.S.-Israel relationship isn't what it used to be. There have been a series of painful confrontations. Why, it reminds me of the young couple who've also had a series of painful confrontations. And this night, the wife, she comes home and she's loaded for bear, and she goes over to the husband and she says, "You're cold, you're distant, you never express your emotions." And he says, "What's the point?" And she says, "The point is you never tell me you love me." And he thinks about that and he says, "Until further notice, I love you." In the Middle East, Israel faces a myriad of threats from every direction. So it would be natural for many Israelis to wake up some days and say, as the old song does, "Oh man, if the thunder don't get you, the lightning sure will." But they don't. People have always underestimated the resilience of Israel. And now, even after the stinging defeat on Iran, it's important to focus on what's going well for Israel. My father received this award 37 years ago. He was a great optimist. And now I think it's appropriate and necessary to channel that optimism tonight. It's also a privilege. Today, Israel has a $300 billion economy and is the second most important technology center in the world. As George Gilder has written, for the West, Israel isn't the canary in the coal mine. Israel is the coal mine. The West desperately needs technology, and Israel has it. Israel is the leader in new industries, including unmanned vehicles, cyber defense, desalinization, and artificial intelligence, along with ones they've long dominated like microprocessor design and communications, to name just a few. More specifically, Israel has a 50-year lead in technology, in indigenous technology, over its immediate neighbors, and a 20-year lead over Iran. Israel is on the cusp of absorbing 100,000 French Jews with great skills. India will be the most populous nation in the world in 7 years, and Indians love Israel. They already have a $2 trillion economy, and 1 billion Indians will first get their initial high-speed internet connection just in the next few years. So India is just getting rolling, and they've recently purchased 8,000 anti-tank missiles from Israel. After some delay, Israel's abundant natural gas fields will soon begin to flow, bringing billions and billions of dollars into the Israeli economy. Israel is a great place to visit, invest in, move to, fall in love in, and with. It's a great country with a great future. Although Iran received a giant boost from Obama and 42 Democratic senators, Iran has deep problems. Private property is the linchpin of a healthy economy, and Iran has the weakest private property system in the Middle East. Israel has the strongest. Moreover, Iran is facing a massive time bomb. The Iranian economy is heavily dependent on oil exports, yet the sunset of the age of oil is within sight. 70% of oil is used for transportation, yet all of the alternatives like hybrids, plug-in hybrids, pure electrics, hydrogen cars, and natural gas cars are all improving between 5 and 15% per year. And the pace of that innovation is being sustained in part by Israeli research. One of the many serious flaws in the Iran deal is its 10-year duration. A 30-year duration would have provided an excellent chance for generational change there and fuel change worldwide. Still, we can accelerate the fuel change. Buy a hybrid or electric car or convert your car to flex fuel. Support legislation that will make all new vehicles flex fuel and boost hydrogen fueling stations. Germany, for instance, is committed to building 400 hydrogen fueling stations by 2023, 2 years before the Iran deal is up. That's the way to deny Iran its victory in case a new president doesn't tear up the deal, which he or she should. It's worth reminding everyone that Israel is the most crucial ally of the United States. Military cooperation actually began there between the US and Israel with a visit by American Air Force General Rick Sparks in the late 60s to Chatzor, Israel's largest Air Force base. And he was hosted by Aluf Yossi Stein, and they toured the base for several hours. And at the end of the short visit, Rick Sparks said to Yossi, "I'm amazed. The spirit, the elan, the professionalism, it's outstanding. And I'm just stunned. You're able to maintain your planes at 95% readiness on any given day. We struggle to reach 70%. But there's one problem. I just think the base is too small." And Yossi asked Rick, he said, "How big is your air base?" And Rick said, "Why, my air base is so big that I could get in my car at 6 o'clock in the morning and start driving, and I wouldn't make it around in the same day." And Yossi said, "Rick, I had a car like that once. Israel is not only a successful country that fights for itself, it also helps shoulder the burden of freedom around the world. The United States has 5 or 6 major allies around the world, but most of them are deadbeats, spending only 1 or 2% of their GDP on defense, while the United States spends 4.5% and Israel spends 6.5% and develops many innovative weapons. The Merkava is superior to the Abrams tank, and the Falcon AWACS is 100 times better than the American AWACS. Dome, sling, and arrow are revolutionary. In short, Israel can defend itself on the battlefield. It needs our help off the battlefield. The US is a major beneficiary of Israeli weapons. The Air Force uses Israeli targeting pods, helmets, and over 300 improvements to the F-16. American foot soldiers carry Israeli bandages into battle. The US also greatly benefits from Israeli intelligence, especially the magnificent human intelligence that the Mossad provides them. Ironically, some of the systems developed by Israel are far more valuable to the US than they are for Israel. For instance, Israel's Trophy LV and Spear mortar systems dramatically lighten armored vehicles. These systems are especially valuable for a global power that needs to fly thousands of armored vehicles around the world on short notice. In short, the US-Israel alliance is a bargain for America. It's actually quite a surprise for me to be standing here tonight. 20 years ago, I was on the left in Israel. I was in the Kikar moments before Yitzhak Rabin was shot. I supported the idea of making the Palestinians a generous peace offer. It's important to test one's assumptions periodically. I believed then that the Palestinians might be ready for a realistic compromise. It was a grand experiment, but the results were quite clear. They were absolutely not ready, they still aren't, and they may never be ready. Over the decades, the Palestinians have rejected at least 4 serious offers for their own state. Why? Because they want all of Israel. The original Palestinian leader, Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, didn't seek a Palestinian state. He was a pan-Islamist like ISIS and supported Adolf Hitler's genocidal intentions. Yasser Arafat praised the Mufti as his role model. A nasty side effect of the public nature of the Oslo process is that despite the Palestinian rejection of peace at Camp David in July of 2000, it became easier to try and delegitimize Israel's claim to the land. After all, if Israel was willing to concede certain land, the thinking goes, maybe it was never really Jewish land. So let's focus for a moment on the question of whose land it is anyway. Now, I know that everything that needs to be said on this topic has been said already, but since nobody was listening, I want to go over a couple of points. In 1919, the modern points anyway, in 1919, 2 years after the Balfour Declaration, the leader of the Arabs, Faisal Hussein of Mecca, wrote to Chaim Weizmann a letter. And what did he write? He wrote, "We Arabs, especially the educated among us, look with the deepest sympathy on the Zionist movement. We regard the Zionist aims as moderate and proper. We will do our best, insofar as we are concerned, to help them through. We wish the Jews a most hearty welcome home." In 1922, the League of Nations mandate for Palestine put legal teeth into the Balfour Declaration. It stated that Jewish settlement is to be encouraged everywhere west of the Jordan River. If one day Israel, as a vibrant democracy, chooses to give away some of its tiny land, that'll be up to Israelis. But let no one say that it's not Jewish land. It's Jewish land by every conceivable criterion. Israel's future is very bright, in part because of the backing we provide. It'll be a matter of courage, especially for the next 424 days. We survived Adolf Hitler and we defeated the Grand Mufti. If we do our job, no religious impostor nor psychotic Ayatollah will stop the great future of Medinat Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai.
Thank you, Zionists of America. Thank you for the privilege to being on this stage this evening. You know, it's very clear that mankind needed a life-giving civilization and redemption, and thus the Jewish people and the Jewish nation through Abraham was born. The Jewish people, the chosen people, gave mankind the law through Moses, and by extension, it gave culture and society that continues to give to the world life, peace, and mercy today. As a Christian, I owe the Jewish people my thanks and undying appreciation and loyalty. And I have and do today give that unconditionally. Joining me in both admiration and respect for the Jewish faith, for the Jewish state, and the Jewish people is tonight's Dr. Miriam and Sheldon Adelson honoree, Mr. Jon Voight. Jon Voight, like many of you in this room, remains a captain of his industry. From his earliest years here in this city on Broadway to his phenomenal, unparalleled success in Hollywood, Jon Voight's career in entertainment landed him not only the most coveted and deserved top recognition of his industry, the Oscar. Jon continually wins an even higher award by securing both a place in the hearts of his fans internationally across the world, as well as a place in American and cinema history. For decades, this gorgeous, blonde, leading man, of whom every woman in America has a continual crush, has remained at the top of his profession, becoming a true legend in American life. We are among a legend. I came to know Mr. Jon Voight, our national treasure, in 2008 at the presidential convention in Minneapolis, and we instantly connected. Jon was clearly no Hollywood phony. He was and remains an intellectual with great heart and generosity of spirit. He also demonstrated one of the rarest virtues of humankind, that of courage. Throughout our relationship, I observed Jon's unyielding support for Israel and for the Jewish people. It was evident and it was eternal. At the first hint of anti-Semitism, I observed Jon Voight, who wrote and published and went on national TV to make an impassioned, well-reasoned defense of both the Jewish state and the Jewish people. In my life and in my career, I have been privileged to travel the world to meet with kings, prime ministers, and presidents. But one individual stood out and impressed me. Tonight's honoree, Jon Voight. Zionists of America, Doctors Miriam and Sheldon Adelson, you have wisely chosen a Churchill, a man with humble, hidden, unshakable strength in his support of the Jewish people and the Jewish state for your honoree. And he continues to grace the cover of National Magazine after National Magazine, Cigar Aficionado, our nominee for the Dr. Miriam and Sheldon Adelson Award, Jon Voight.
So it's our pleasure to give to Jon Voight, whom I think of when I think of Hollywood and people in that industry and of that genre as the leading Zionist in the entire genre, not only for movies and television, but as a human being and as a major supporter of the State of Israel. And we're thrilled to give you the Dr. Miriam and Sheldon G. Adelson Award, for defending of Israel. We applaud your passionate love of God, the Jewish people, and Eretz Yisrael. You are a giant among righteous Gentiles and an extraordinary defender of Israel. Your powerful words and actions promoting the truth of the Islamic-Arab war against Israel and Christians inspire us all. Thank you.
There are really no words to express my gratitude and humbleness in the acceptance of such a great honor as this. To be in the same room with the greatest philanthropists in the world and the greatest protectors of our great state of Israel is more than humbling. I know what I'm about to read is nothing anyone in this room is not aware of. But to speak the truth of this great nation, Israel, is always energizing for all our souls. So please permit me to read on. I'll cover some of the things that have been covered already, but you'll see what I'm getting to. In 1922, the Allied powers came together after World War I and created the countries of the Middle East on what had been the Ottoman Empire. And they decreed through the League of Nations, quote, recognition has thereby been given to the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and to the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. To many, it may have sounded like the fulfillment of ancient prophecies. Consider the words of the prophet Amos. Quote, I will bring back my exiled people, Israel. They will rebuild their ruined cities and live in them. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine. They will make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant Israel in their own land, never again to be uprooted from the land I have given them, says the Lord your God. The British were given the mandate to see this accomplished. But the wishes of the British political leadership were subverted on the ground, and the British military installed Jew-hating Amin al-Husseini as Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and worked with Arabs to dismantle the promise of a Jewish state. But after the Holocaust, the world's sympathies were with the Jews, and in 1947, the UN came together in a surprising manner, one might even say miraculous, with Russia supplying the deciding vote, and the Jews were offered a portion of what they were legally entitled to, but it was at least a beginning, and they took it. The Arabs were offered the rest of the land of Israel, and they refused it. Why did they refuse it? Because they didn't want to sign on to anything that gave Jews even a portion of the land. From the beginning, it was obvious they weren't going to share anything with the Jewish people. and that remains their stance today. So, in 1948, 5 Arab countries attacked the newborn state: Egypt, Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan, carried out an unprovoked illegal war, and amazingly, Israel prevailed. These nations were never held accountable. And in the years that followed, the small state of Israel would be continuously attacked, and Israel would continue to be victorious. Each war, a miracle. Recalling God's promise in Leviticus, quote, "If you follow my decrees and are careful to obey my commands, you will pursue your enemies, and they will fall by the sword before you. 5 of you will chase 100, and 100 of you will chase 10,000, and your enemies will fall by the sword before you." But all these wars have been at great cost. So many of Israel's young men have been maimed or perished in defense of their country. So many of their citizens have been the victims of terror attacks and missiles as they built an oasis on what was a barren land and established the most humane and democratic government in the whole Middle East. In 1967, in another great defensive war, the war called the Six-Day War, Israel reclaimed the remaining territories granted to them by the still legally valid promise of the League of Nations. Since then, the 2 old enemies, anti-Semitism and the influence of Arab oil on Europe, have put pressure on Israel to give this land to the Palestinians for a promise of peace. As we know, in one agonizing moment of bending to this pressure, Israel uprooted thousands of Jewish families and gave Gaza magnanimously to the Palestinians in the hope of securing peace. And what did they get in return? Rocket attacks and terror tunnels. It would be the biggest mistake the Israeli government has made. And so, it's no mystery what will happen if they give up Samaria and Judea. Yet the idea of a 2-state solution took hold. America finally endorsed it under Bill Clinton, and then under George Bush, and now under Barack Obama, though it was always at base a plan concocted to fulfill the Arab pledge to drive the Jews into the sea. We must finally expose this ploy for what it is and turn toward a real solution. There is an answer provided in the careful research of Caroline Glick's book, The Israeli Solution. I urge us all to read that book. We must make it clear and share that book. We must make it clear to the entire world Israel is a democracy and willing to find peace if the Palestinian people stop calling for their destruction. Israel is in a very difficult situation, especially now that Barack Obama has turned his back on Prime Minister Netanyahu. Many Jewish people thought it would be a great thing to have a minority as president. Now, 7 years into Obama's term, we see he is not the man we thought would be a great ally for Israel. We really must pray the coming 2016 election will bring in a Republican. someone who can undo all these errors and become Israel's ally once again. I am certain that the people in this room tonight will be instrumental in bringing this about, and I'm proud to be among you. God bless us all.
Jonathan cannot be here tonight because while he is out of prison, he is not free. And I will take 2 minutes to explain the status because we still need your support. The Parole Commission has imposed onerous and unnecessary restrictions on Jonathan's parole: 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. curfew, GPS tracking 24/7, movement restricted to a small portion of New York City, computer monitoring of the internet at home and at work. The curfew, as you can well imagine, makes it impossible to attend evening religious services, makes it impossible to participate in Shabbat dinners or holiday dinners with friends or family. It also, in New York City, makes it virtually impossible to conduct any normal profession. Computer monitoring of the internet itself, in effect, bars meaningful employment. No rational institution in America would waive wholesale its central Fourth Amendment right against a general search and agree to have the government troll through its entire business systems without limit and without probable cause. We filed on Friday, upon the release in New York federal court, a petition challenging these restrictions. They are punitive, they are unnecessary, they are unlawful. The sole justification the Parole Commission gives for these restrictions is, quote, they are needed to deter from further criminal conduct. And yet, having been required to grant parole under the applicable statute, once it became clear there was no reasonable probability of further criminal conduct, because the information, to the extent Jonathan had any of this still in his head, is 30 and 31 years old. And as experts have said and sworn in our applications for parole, this information is stale, useless, and of no interest to anyone. Having reached that conclusion and granted parole, it is simply preposterous and disingenuous to now restrict Jonathan on the disingenuous ground that restriction would deter further criminal activity. Accordingly, we need your continued support as we work to obtain true freedom for Jonathan. True freedom for Jonathan and his beloved wife Esther, in order for them to choose where to move, where to travel, including the right to visit Israel, the right to move to Israel, and to build their lives together in the Holy Land. On behalf of Jonathan and Esther, I want to thank all of you for your continued support. I want to thank all of you and the Zionist Organization of America for all that you do to support the security and safety of Medinat Yisrael and the security and safety of Jews everywhere. Thank you. Am Yisrael Chai.
From Jerusalem, I send warm greetings to all of you in New York at the ZOA's annual Brandeis Award Dinner. And it's my pleasure to join you in honoring the recipients of tonight's awards. Ambassador Ron Dermer, congratulations, Ron, on receiving the Bob Shulman Award for Outstanding Diplomacy. You're an outstanding diplomat. Through thick and thin, You represent Israel's case openly, clearly, courageously. Jon Voight, congratulations on receiving the Sheldon and Miriam Adelson Defense of Israel Award. I know you for many, many years. You've always been a stalwart champion of Israel, I think from the understanding of our common heritage and our common values, and that inspires you to take action these days, every day. Jack Halpern, congratulations on receiving the Brandeis Award for work on behalf of the Jewish people. And Professor Alan Dershowitz, congratulations, Alan, on receiving the Mort Zuckerman Award for outstanding pro-Israel journalism. You tell it like it is all the time. I know all four of you. I know that you've done so many things over the years for the State of Israel. I know what you're doing for us today, and I know what you will do for our people tomorrow. I want to express my deep personal appreciation for your important work to strengthen the alliance between our two democracies, for demonstrating moral clarity in standing up for Israel's right to defend itself, for your unwavering commitment to the Jewish people, the Jewish state, and the Jewish future. Thank you all, and thank you also for your personal friendship. You're really making a difference for all of us. Thank you.
I'd like to continue with another video, if I may, which is the IDF ZOA mission video. This is a compilation of several ZOA missions to Israel, to the IDF. This was done under the leadership of our Brooklyn chapter president, Reuben Margulis, and our director of the ZOA in Israel, Jeff Dowby, who have worked tirelessly to put this mission together over the years. I believe it's now 14 years that they've been doing this. And I give them, you can applaud. This is something that's worth applauding for.
אנחנו באנו מחוץ לארץ, וגם כן יש כמה אנשים כאן שגרים עכשיו בארץ, שעשו עלייה, ובאנו להגיד לכם תודה, שאתם שומרים את הארץ לא רק בשביל האנשים שגרים כאן, אבל בשביל כל היהודים בכל העולם. וזה למה באנו להגיד לכם תודה. וקיבלתם עם המשלחמנות, וקיבלתם גם כן מכתבים שכתוב מהתלמידים בחוץ לארץ שכותבים לכם להגיד אותו דבר. תודה על כל מה שאתם עושים, שאתם תצליחו.
My name is Elon Zlotnick from Los Angeles. I'm a Oleh Chadash, Chayil Bodeh. My name is Matt Shager. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio.
I'm Sam Fergan from Scarsdale, New York.
From San Diego, California.
From Washington, D.C.
My mom is from Texas, and I'm a soldier here.
Hi, I'm Joey Sacro from Baltimore, Maryland.
Hi, I'm Jaden Wright from Johannesburg, South Africa.
Hi, I'm Naomi Harvey from Sydney, Australia.
I just wanted to say thank you very much for the great gifts. We really appreciate it. We all flipped out when we saw the buses.
Well, thank you for the Mishloach Manot. It means a lot to us.
To me, to get Mishloach Manot for Purim means the world. It just makes my heart.
It just makes our day, makes our week.
Thank you very much.
כולנו יחד, יחד שבטי ישראל.
so much. Amazing people around the world bring us Michele Bachmann, and we really appreciate it.
We appreciate these Michele Bachmannos. They really they give us chizuk and they really help us.
We come to thank them, but instead they thank us. And that's a wonderful feedback, and it makes you come every year.
I wish I could be at this wonderful event, but unfortunately my commitments make that impossible this year. I was there last year. I hope to be here again next year. This is a time of real danger for the nation state of the Jewish people of Israel and for supporters of Israel around the world, especially today on college campuses in Europe and in the United States. It's very difficult to be a Zionist on a college campus today. Zionists today are physically harassed. They're graded down by teachers. They're called names: Zio-fascist, racist, colonialist, supporters of apartheid. We all read in the papers and see on the media that some radical students, particularly of the hard left, want to have safe places, safe spaces for their ideas. They don't want contrary ideas to be expressed in the classroom or on the campus. But many of the same people who demand safe spaces for themselves deny physical safety to Zionists and people who disagree with them on the college campuses. Take, for example, the City College of New York, the City University of New York, where I went as a student to Brooklyn College. And recently there were demonstrations at Hunter by the Students for Justice for Palestine. And many of the people in the among the demonstrators were shouting out horrible slogans, Zionists out of City University of New York. And we know what they mean by Zionists. They mean Jews, particularly those who show any support for Israel. They were protesting high tuition, and they were blaming the high tuition on Zionist administrators. What they mean is that some of the administrators at the city universities happen to be Jewish, and immediately they are labeled with what they regard as a negative term. I regard it as a positive term, obviously, Zionist. But this is bigotry of the worst kind. And so what you have is the hypocrisy of some of the same people who are demanding safe spaces for themselves, for their ideas, which are entitled to no safe space at any university, are denying physical safety to students who espouse the national liberation of the Jewish people, namely Zionism. I recently had an experience myself. I was invited to deliver the Milton Eisenhower lecture at at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore. And the same students same group, Students for Justice for Palestine, who were calling for Zionists out of City University, issued a protest asking that I not be allowed to speak because I would be harassing students. What was the harassment? They claimed that by not acknowledging that Israel commits war crimes against the Palestinians, I was actually harassing students. So in other words, my silence on an issue that they disagree with constitutes harassment in their view. They also claimed that I violated the ethical code of the university by denying that Israel commits war crimes against the Palestinians. This is topsy-turvy morality. This is hypocrisy at its worst. And the irony is that it's many of the same students who demand one thing for themselves: speech for me, but not for thee; safety for me, but not for thee. And it was just a symbol of what's going on at many other universities. At Hopkins, fortunately, the administration took a strong stand on my behalf. Not so at many other universities, where administrators are frightened of students, and where administrators won't stand up for the students, and where they allow students who are opposed to Zionism in Israel to say anything they want. But if any Zionist says anything that even raises questions, they are exposed to a double standard and often harassed and their lives made difficult on university campuses. This is a symptom of something far more serious. It's a symptom of a view that says among hardliners of the left and of radical Islam that there is only one answer to complex problems, one answer to the Middle East, one answer to what's going on in the world today, and that answer is jihad, that answer is intifada, which students yell at other students today on college campuses. And it's that kind of singular view that leads from censorship to book burning, ultimately to violence and the kind of thing we're seeing around the world today. So this is a dangerous time, and it's very important for Zionists to proudly proclaim their Zionism, to explain to the world that Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, and that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. And we should continue proudly to support Israel, proudly to support Zionism, and to fight back against the bigots who would apply a double standard as is being applied on many universities today. So I congratulate this great organization for the work it does and urge you to keep doing this important work. May you go from strength to strength. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to present to you the Bob Shulman Award for Outstanding Diplomacy to Ron Dermer, the Israeli ambassador to the United States. Ambassador Dermer, we applaud you for your powerful, courageous, and effective diplomacy on behalf of Israel. Your brilliant and eloquent written and verbal advocacy to promote the whole truth about the Islamic-Arab war against Israel. Your principled moral stance is an inspiration to all of us. Thank you, Ambassador Dermer.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. I recognize that symbol. It's an old symbol. We're about to celebrate a holiday where we're going to use it. It's a symbol of the indomitable spirit of the Jewish people. And if there is one organization that represents the indomitable spirit of the Jewish people, it is the Zionist Organization of America. I want to thank you for this award. It's particularly meaningful to me because I know the ZOA does not give out awards lightly. This is an organization that stands for something. Hey guys, can you hear me in the back of the room? Because I can hear you. You can hear me. I'm from Miami Beach, so I always start every speech. Can you hear me in the back of the room? When you receive an award from an organization that stands for something, it usually means that they believe you stand for something, so I am deeply humbled by your decision to give me this award tonight. I want to especially thank Mort Klein for everything he does day in and day out, year in and year out. But Mort, I do have one request. Every once in a while, you need to get off the fence and tell people what you really think. Enough with all this wishy-washiness back and forth. Take a stand every once in a while. I think people here would appreciate it. Seriously, Mort, for decades, the Jewish people and the Jewish state have been blessed with your leadership, and we expect to be blessed with your leadership for many, many, many years to come. Thank you for everything you do. I want to recognize my colleague who you heard from earlier today, UN Ambassador Danny Danon. Ambassador Danon is definitely someone who stands for something, and I know that quality will serve him well as the new voice of Israel in the Hall of Nations. And speaking of standing for something, Israel, the Jewish people, are very fortunate to have in our corner two people who never throw in the towel and who will always be there until the fight is won. So please join me once again in thanking the two greatest Jewish philanthropists of our time, Sheldon and Miri Adelson. I also want to recognize Jon Voight. Jon, I'm not going to make the mistake, again, of following you after you speak. That's never going to happen again. You once said, you didn't say it tonight, you said a lot of remarkable things tonight, but you once said that the Jewish people are the conscience of the world. And that's long been true, and it's a pretty difficult burden, a great burden, but a difficult burden to bear. But you sometimes seem to be the conscience of Hollywood, and that might be an even more difficult burden to bear. Now, Mr. Voight, the Jewish people are an ancient people with a very long memory. That is why I know that long after many Oscar winners will be forgotten, you will be remembered for standing against the current and for standing with Israel. I want to thank former Congresswoman Michele Bachmann and Congressman Ed Royce, who was here earlier tonight. Thank you for everything that you have done and continue to do for Israel. Finally, I understand that there are a few students in the house. I don't know, that doesn't sound like a ZOA cheer. I understand that there are a few students in the house. That's more like it. You are the future. So always follow the ZOA way. And what that means for me is always standing tall and standing proud in defending Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, we've heard some pretty good speeches here tonight. Powerful speeches about Zionism, about Israel's challenges in the region, about Israel's challenges on campus. So I thought tonight that I would speak about another challenge, a challenge that not only affects Israel, but affects the whole world, and that's the battle against terrorism. 9 days ago, 129 people were killed in the terror attacks in Paris, and hundreds more were wounded. Within hours, a wave of solidarity with France and sympathy with the victims rightfully swept across the globe. The colors of the French flag were not only projected onto the Eiffel Tower, they were projected on famous sites across the world. The Opera House in Sydney, the Empire State Building in New York, the old city walls of Jerusalem. Within hours, the French president declared the attack an act of war. French planes bombed targets in Syria. French police raided scores of apartments in Paris. The Belgians did the same in Brussels. Many were arrested. Some were killed. So now that you've seen those actions, now that you've watched some of the 24/7 news coverage, now that you've heard from the so-called experts, here's my question for all of you. By a show of hands, how many of you think the world has finally woken up? How many of you think the international community will now have the clarity to successfully prosecute this war and win it? Mort, that's pretty good work. Zero. Well, I share your skepticism. Instead of clarity, I see confusion. Confusion over the nature of the enemy and confusion over the nature of terrorism. And the most powerful evidence of that confusion is the international community's shameful treatment of Israel. Let's start with the nature of the enemy. The enemy has a name. It's called militant Islam. It's not militants, it's not Islam, it's militant Islam. The enemy is not militancy. Timothy McVeigh was a militant individual. FARC in Colombia and the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka are militant organizations. Many individuals and organizations have radical ideas. They commit heinous acts of terror and are threats to the countries in which they operate. But they are not part of a global movement. They do not possess a global ideology, and therefore they do not pose an acute threat to global peace and security. Militant Islamists, on the other hand, are part of a global movement. They do share a global ideology. They go by many different names. Some are Sunni, some are Shia. Some would like to take everyone back to the 7th century. Some are a bit more progressive. They want to take us back to the 10th century. But regardless of whether militant Islamists operate in Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Yemen, Mali, Nigeria, or Indonesia, or anywhere else, regardless of whether the name they go by is the Quds Force, ISIS, Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, or Jamaat Islamiyah, those groups are fired by a similar fanaticism. They seek to reverse the decline of the West, the decline of Islam, I should say, and the rise of the West. They hope to reverse that decline by establishing a caliphate or an imamate from which Islam will spread, ultimately bringing the entire world under the rule of Islam. In that world, women are chattel, gays are hanged, and minorities are either eliminated or persecuted. As for America and Israel, in a militant Islamic world, they will not exist. Now, because so many different militant Islamic groups share this basic ideology, because the forces of militant Islam are ascendant in the Islamic world today, and because these forces perpetrate their crimes in the name of Islam, many have simply concluded that the problem is Islam itself. But for those of you who think this, think again. Faiths tend to be very malleable things. They get interpreted in different ways at different times. For most of the last 1,400 years, Islam was much more tolerant to minorities than Christianity was. Jews, of all people, should know this. In the 11th century, if Jews had had a choice between living in Germany or living in Morocco, they would have been better off in Morocco. In the 15th century, if the choice had been Spain or Turkey, they would have been better off in Turkey. In the 17th century, if the choice had been Ukraine or Persia, they would have been better off in Persia. But the Christianity of the 21st century is very different than the Christianity of the 11th, 15th, and 17th century. In case no one noticed, there's been a few developments since then. A Reformation, a Counter-Reformation, an Enlightenment, secularization, and many other changes. And in case no one noticed, the militant Islam of the 21st century is definitely not the same as the relatively tolerant Islam of the past, which respected scholarship and culture. Today, militant Islamists destroy priceless heritage sites, decimate ancient Christian communities, and specialize in decapitating infidels, raping women, and enslaving children. In the 21st century, it is Muslims, not Christians, who are killing Jews in the name of religion. Today it is hard to imagine Jews choosing to live in Muslim-majority countries rather than Christian-majority countries. In fact, even when Jews do face dangers in Christian-majority countries, it is often from militant Islamists who live there. Given these politically incorrect facts, I can understand why many people mistakenly believe that the problem is Islam itself or Muslims in general. But we should remember that the most frequent victims of the militant Islamists are Muslims who do not share their fanaticism, Muslims who go to the wrong mosque or who don't go to any mosque at all are being executed across the Middle East, and hundreds of millions of Muslims in the region are living in fear for themselves and their families. No less important, we must also remember that cultures, civilizations, and faiths can change drastically over time, sometimes even in short periods of time. The Germany of 1930, the Germany of 1940, and the Germany of 1950 were three Germanys in which the same people lived, in which they spoke the same language, enjoyed the same culture, and shared the same history. But these were three very different Germanys. In 1940, a malignant force was ascendant in Germany. It was poisoning the minds of its youth and dragging down a civilization from the heights of achievement to the depths of depravity, and dragging down the whole world with it. So too, a malignant force is now ascendant in the Islamic world. It is poisoning the minds of its youth and dragging down an entire civilization into the abyss. And it too would drag down the entire world. But just as the forces that were ascendant in Germany of 1940 are not those that are ascendant in Germany today, there is no reason to believe that the forces that will be ascendant in the Islamic world 75 years from now will be the same forces that are ascendant in the Islamic world today. But for that to happen, ladies and gentlemen, it is not only important to clearly define the enemy, it is important to defeat the enemy. And once again here, I see more confusion than clarity. I'm not talking about the confusion over the right strategy to pursue in Syria. That's a complicated issue with many moving parts, and I'm not going to offer any advice on that tonight. I'm talking about something much deeper. The main weapon of militant Islam today is terrorism. And to defeat militant Islam, we must ensure that this weapon is neutralized. But to neutralize that weapon, we must identify it. Terrorism is the deliberate targeting of non-combatants, whether men, women, or children. Terrorism is not defined by the identity of the perpetrator. States like Iran, organizations like ISIS, individuals like Ted Kaczynski can all commit acts of terrorism. Terrorism is also not defined by the cause in whose name it is employed. It does not matter if that cause is fighting for national independence or fighting against inequality. Terrorism is defined only by the act itself. The terrorist deliberately targets non-combatants. The terrorist deliberately targets innocent civilians. Now, I often hear people say you cannot wage a war on terrorism because terrorism is merely a tactic. In this view, you can't wage a war on terrorism any more than you can wage a war against kamikaze pilots slamming into battleships or the placing of roadside bombs. But this misses a crucial moral difference. Terrorism is a tactic of warfare that by its very nature is illegitimate. Other tactics of war may or may not be moral. That depends on the circumstance. But terrorism is an immoral weapon no matter what the circumstance. And to counter this immoral weapon, We need more than good intelligence, good police, and good soldiers and tough laws. We need a moral antidote. We need moral outrage. We need to deny terrorists any moral legitimacy for their actions. We need to ensure that those who employ terrorism get no hearing for their grievances. We need to ensure they pay a heavy price that sets their cause back. And here is where the world has totally and utterly failed. Rather than take an unequivocal moral stance against all acts of terrorism, the response to terror is often a pro forma condemnation of the killing of innocent people, followed quickly by the search for a reason that would explain, if not justify, those killings. The reason for this foolishness is that most people think the root cause of terrorism is poverty or the deprivation of rights. They believe that desperation or hopelessness drives people to terrorism. And so they believe that by alleviating poverty, by launching some massive jobs program, by addressing some specific grievance, by giving terrorists hope, terrorism will somehow stop. But most terrorists are neither poor nor desperate. In fact, they tend to be richer and better educated than their peers. Osama bin Laden and the 19 hijackers on 9/11 were not on welfare. Many of those who have flocked to the killing fields of Syria to join ISIS are from middle-class backgrounds. In fact, far from being hopeless, most terrorists are filled with hope. The hope that comes from finding a powerful identity that gives them meaning. The hope that comes from dedicating oneself to a cause that they believe will lead them to glory and victory. The reason why people remain so confused about the nature of terrorism, despite all the evidence, is that they confuse the root cause of a conflict with the root cause of terrorism. You see, there are many conflicts in the world. Some have to do with poverty. Some have to do with the deprivation of rights. But most conflicts, no matter how difficult they may be, generally do not convince people to kill the innocent, to murder women and children. Gandhi led the people of India in a conflict with the British. He wanted to end the British occupation of India, but he did not send his followers to shoot up bars in London. Martin Luther King led African Americans in the struggle for civil rights, but he did not tell his followers to blow themselves up at NFL football games. The root cause of terrorism has always been the same. It is a totalitarian mindset. It is a mindset that takes root when people are poisoned by ideologies which devalue human life. Ideologies which claim that there are some ends that are so noble and so worthy that they justify any means to achieve them. For those who embrace these ideologies, the most profane and evil actions become pure and good. 75 years ago, the totalitarian mindset came in the form of the ideology of Nazism, the belief in a master race. Today, this totalitarian mindset comes in the form of the ideology of militant Islam, the belief in a master faith. And as with Nazism, there is absolutely no way to appease militant Islam. The only thing that we can do is defeat it, militarily on the battlefield and ideologically in the war of ideas. But here, too, I remain deeply skeptical, because instead of the international community backing all those who are fighting the forces of militant Islam, we see confusion rather than clarity. Nowhere is this confusion more obvious than in the world's shameful treatment of Israel. In the past few weeks, 19 Israelis have been killed and some 200 have been wounded in terror attacks. Just to put that number in perspective, the population of France is about 65 million. That's about 8 times the population of Israel. So relative to the size of the population, 19 Israeli murdered and 200 wounded is the equivalent of about 150 killed in Paris and 1,600 people wounded. And that's more that were killed and wounded a week ago Friday. But rather than back Israel, as 13-year-old boys and 80-year-old grandmothers are stabbed in the streets, we hear outrageous statements about a cycle of violence and the need for both sides to act with restraint. Imagine what would happen if the international community said that the murders in Paris and the French bombing in Syria were part of a cycle of violence that had to stop. Imagine what would happen if the Secretary General of the United Nations asked the French president and ISIS to act with restraint and work to restore calm. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no democracy more endangered than Israel by the forces of militant Islam. There is no democracy more afflicted by the scourge of terrorism than Israel. Yet as Israel stands on the front lines in this great and historic battle, we are often cast as being part of the problem rather than being part of the solution. You have to understand, we are constantly told, Palestinian terrorists are perpetrating these attacks because of the so-called occupation or because there is no peace process. This drivel, and that's what it is, drivel, is repeated even though Palestinian terrorists were murdering Jews for nearly half a century before that so-called occupation and in the nearly half century since. Even though Palestinian terrorists were murdering Jews when the peace process was racing ahead and when it was at a standstill. And this drivel is repeated even though the Palestinian leadership continues to reward terrorism and promote a culture that glorifies it. Palestinian-controlled television used Sesame Street-like characters to teach Palestinian children to hate Jews. Palestinian squares are named after mass murderers of Jews, and Palestinians who kill Jews are paid handsomely by the Palestinian Authority if they sit in prison and celebrated as martyrs if they die. In face of this foolishness and ghoulishness, does the international community stand with Israel? No, it blames Israel. It labels Israel. It libels Israel. The international community's confusion over the nature of the enemy and the causes of terrorism is so profound that the Swedish foreign minister somehow actually found a way to shift blame, or at least some part of the blame, for what happened in Paris onto Israel. This idiocy would be humorous if it was not so dangerous. Ladies and gentlemen, the test for whether the world has really turned the corner in the battle against militant Islam and the battle against terrorism is not how it responds to the terror attacks in Paris. It's how it responds to the terror attacks in Jerusalem. When they stop blaming Israel and stop making excuses for Palestinian terror and start standing with Israel against Palestinian terror, then I will believe that the world has woken up. When I see the Eiffel Tower lit up with Israeli blue and white after a terror attack in Israel, then I'll know that the world finally gets it. Until then, Count me among the skeptics when it comes to the world, but count me among the believers when it comes to Israel. We know the enemy we face. We know the roots of its fanaticism. We know that we stand on the front line in a battle between modernity and medievalism. And no matter whether the world stands with us or not as we face this evil, Israel will hold that line and defend itself. I have news for all the fanatics in the Middle East and the fools who support them around the world. The Jewish people are no longer a stateless, voiceless, and powerless people. You see, we used to have to beg kings and presidents and prime ministers to defend us. Today, the Jewish people defend themselves. And we know that as we defend ourselves, one organization will always be standing by our side: the Zionist Organization of America, standing up for moral clarity, standing up for truth, standing up for Israel. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know how anyone is supposed to follow Ambassador Ron Dermer. That was one of the most brilliant speeches I've ever heard. It happens to be identical to the speech I wrote over the weekend. Now I can't present it. I am so proud and privileged to be here with all of you tonight to the greatest superstar gala, ZOA dinner, any organization has ever had. What a lineup. What a lineup. It seems the only major Jewish Zionist person not here tonight is a man named Jonathan Pollard. But thank God he now could be here tonight. Now it will be possible. I so admire and appreciate that by all of you being here tonight, you show the love and devotion each of you have for Israel, as well as the love and devotion each of you have for Jon Voight and Sheldon and Miriam Adelson. We at ZOA will never be the shah-still Jews of silence of the past. Never again can we afford to ever be that way. As is written in Ezekiel chapter 33, if the watchman sees the sword advancing and does not blow the horn, so that the people are not warned, and the sword comes and destroys even one of them, God will demand a reckoning. Well, let me tell Hashem, ZOA will blow and blow and blow its horn for the Jewish people of Israel. We all grieve terribly for the many hundreds of new innocent victims of radical Islamic terrorism, of the monstrous attacks only last week in Paris, the monstrous attacks in Paris against Charlie Hebdo, the kosher grocery, the attacks on tourists in the museum in Tunisia, the attacks against the Kurds and the Christians, the murders in India and Spain and England, the murders of 225 Russians in a jet over Egypt, the murder of hundreds in Africa by the Islamic Boko Haram, the murders in Mali, and of course 9/11, and the recent weeks and really decades of almost constant murders of Jews in Israel. What do all these murders have in common? They're not caused by radical Jews, by radical Buddhists. They're not caused by radical Hindus or by radical Christians. They are caused by radical extremist terrorist Muslims. Mr. President, please let us know that you understand that. Let us know you understand that, Mr. President. You haven't done it yet. I have a thought, maybe controversial, especially with the ambassadors here. I don't even know if it's legal. But the situation in Israel has become frightening. I humbly suggest that this cannot and must not go on. In addition to destroying the radical Muslims' murderers' homes, why not demand that the parents of these killers, maybe even the siblings of these killers, must simply publicly condemn their sons or daughters or brothers and sisters' murders of innocent Jews publicly in Arabic and Hebrew. And if they refuse to simply condemn these murders in Arabic or Hebrew, we should say to them, you have now lost your citizenship and we will deport you. So the killers will know their families will pay a heavy price. Let me ask you a question. Are these radical Islamic, ISIS evil murderers of the hundreds of French and British and Indians and Africans and Americans, are they really any different, as the ambassador pointed out, from the radical Islamic Palestinian Authority, Fatah murders, the Hamas murders, the Hezbollah murders of Jews in Israel? The ISIS Islamic terrorists communiques after these attacks, they said, they praised the murderers as, quote, youths who left the worldly life and advanced toward the enemy for Allah's sake. Well, that's the same, ladies and gentlemen, as the views expressed by Palestinian Arab suicide bombers who leave behind videos saying they intend to give their lives and kill evil Jews and earn paradise. And ISIS has stated after these attacks, we ask Allah to accept these heroes amongst the martyrs and to allow us to follow them and to martyr them, unquote. This is the same as what Mahmoud Abbas of the PO says about dead Palestinian terrorists. In fact, only last week a new hit song in the PA is called There Is Nothing Sweeter Than Martyrdom. And when ISIS speaks after these attacks about the fact that they murdered hundreds of pagans gathered for a concert of prostitution and vice, how is that different from Mahmoud Abbas urging Palestinians to sow violence against Jews, defiling the Temple Mount with their filthy feet, saying that Jews are a dirty people who are evil and worship the devil? Well, there is one difference. When they murder Jews, as Ambassador Dermer pointed out, the world is essentially silent. During the 6-year terror war from 2000 to 2006, when 2,000 Jews were murdered and 10,000 maimed, the world ignored these killings and were essentially silent. Joseph Biden this week talked about the people being murdered in various countries. He didn't mention Israel. President Obama has given many speeches about terrorism, and he mentions all the different countries where terrorism occurs. But President Obama has never included Israel in those speeches, ladies and gentlemen. These murders are not just by lone wolves, solitary Islamic terror groups. Most of the killers are inspired to carry out their despicable murders due to the atmosphere created by the society in which they grew up, a culture that glorifies murder and names schools and streets and sports teams and children's camps after these killers, sanctifying death, a culture whose goal is to destroy the non-Muslim infidels, the Muslims whose view of the world they disagree with, and of course their greatest prize is the Jew. They grew up in a culture where the Hamas charter calls for the murder of every Jew, where the Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas's charter, calls for terrorism against Jews. Is it any wonder that in Turkey this week, when there was a moment of silence for the murders of innocent Parisians, not only were they booing and hissing these Muslims in the stand, they started screaming Allahu Akbar, which really means God, our God, is greater than yours. Is it any wonder that mothers of Palestinian Arabs proclaim their pride when their children murder Jews? Al-Azhar University in Cairo, which is the nearest thing Islam has to a religious authority, uses in their course materials teachings that, quote, the war against the infidels is an obligation of all intelligent, healthy, free, and able men. This is their leading Islamic university teaching that, and we hear almost none about this in our media or even among most of our politicians around the world. Is it any wonder that the Pew poll, P-E-W, in a poll of Muslim-majority countries, there are 50 of them, show that from 70 to 97% of Muslims in these countries have enormous antipathy and hatred toward Jews and toward Israel. That's why I say, and I'm saying this as a private citizen, not only dare we not allow Syrian Muslims into this country because of the terrorist dangers, when the head of Lebanon says 2% of them are members of ISIS, and we have no intelligence and no data to vet these Syrians. But I, as an American Jew and Zionist, I don't want people who hate Jews in Israel to come into the United States of America. I mentioned this to several congressmen this morning by phone before I got here, and they said, these were congressmen who were supporting Syrian Muslims coming here, and they said they hadn't even thought about this issue. And I said to them, if there was a country that was racist, where clearly the vast majority hated blacks, and there was a civil war and they wanted to come to this country, would we bring these people who hate blacks to America? I dare not. I dare say that President Obama wouldn't say there's a humanitarian need to bring these refugees from this country to the United States of America, even though they hate blacks. I don't think he would ever say such a thing. Radical Islam must be identified, confronted, and defeated. That means treating as pariahs all those who promote it. We must treat as a pariah the OIC, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Muslim Brotherhood, Iran, the Palestinian Arabs. People say to me, Mort, you can't stop an ideology. You can't stop it. And I say to them, after we crushed the Nazis in World War II, you couldn't find a single German who said they were a Nazi. When you asked them, you couldn't find a single German who said they even knew about Nazis. World War II and military strength crushed Nazism, and that's the way we must crush radical Islam. Of course, Israel is only the little Satan, while U.S. is the big Satan. ISIS is regularly threatening to blow up the White House and major cities in America. And I will have to tell you, though, it pains me to say as an American citizen that the United States has done very little to destroy ISIS. Our president has imposed severe restrictions on our soldiers. Do you know what the rules of engagement that this president has ordered to our soldiers? You cannot use any military action if it may kill a single civilian. No military action if it may kill a single civilian. That's why 75% of the bombing raids America has launched against ISIS, they don't drop any bombs because there may be one civilian who may die. And let me tell you, if you make a determination that you will only fight and use military action only if you can avoid any civilian casualties at all costs, you can't fight a war and you will lose. We only use 8 to 15 bombings a day, while the Army is telling President Obama, you've got to use 700 or 800 or 900 bombings a day. And ISIS makes most of their money through oil. There are hundreds and hundreds of trucks that are driving around in the Middle East, ISIS trucks, delivering oil where they make $500 million a year. You know, for 14 months, this president has refused to allow us to bomb those trucks, to stop that money going to ISIS. Why has he decided not to allow us to bomb those trucks? Because they're driven by civilians. Yes, because they're driven by civilians. I must say this weekend was the first weekend they finally began to bomb those trucks. These rules of engagement has got to be changed. So the U.S. has taken minimal military action against ISIS, and it's also taken little action against the Palestinian Authority. It continues to give the Palestinian Authority $500 million a year, despite Abbas's actions, despite the fact that the PA is promoting hatred and violence in every aspect, against Jews in every aspect of their culture. I'm going to cut my speech short. I have many things I wanted to say about that. But one of the things President Abbas has been saying for the last few weeks is saying how Jerusalem is holy only to Muslims, not to Jews. This is one of the huge lies that President Abbas has been promoting. But the truth, and I'll make this short, of our beloved holy city of Jerusalem is that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel under King David 3,000 years ago. It's never been the capital of any nation in history except the Jews. When the Arabs conquered Palestine in 716, they made Ramla their capital, not Jerusalem. In Judaism, our holiest places are in eastern Jerusalem. Both Jewish temples, the Temple Mount, the Western Wall. Our Jewish holy books mention the word Jerusalem 660 times. It is never, ever mentioned in the Quran. So this is just a gigantic lie. I can't go into any more detail that Jerusalem is holy to Muslims. It is not. It's simply a propaganda lie. We must fight this and make this clear to our members of Congress and to the media. 2,500 years ago, on the shores of Babylon, the Jewish people facing the first exile proclaimed, "If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its cunning. If I do not remember thee, may my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth." It's an oath that Jews have kept faithfully and will continue to keep faithfully forever, evermore. Let me just end by saying, our Holy Torah promises us that we are an eternal people, never to be destroyed. And unlike politicians, God does not break his promises. So it has been that we're a holy people and eternal, and so will continue to be. The Jewish people will prevail forevermore. I will end with a quote from Winston Churchill, which he said about World War II that applies so much tonight. Winston Churchill said, "We have before us," as he was facing the Nazis and the onslaught during World War II, "we have before us an ordeal of the most grievous kind. We have before us many, many long months of struggle and of suffering. You ask," said Churchill, "what is our policy? I can say it is to wage war against this terrorism by sea, by land, and by air, with all of our might and with all of the strength that God can give us to wage war against this monstrous tyranny. That is our policy," said Churchill. You ask, what is our aim? I answer in one word. Our aim is victory. Victory at all costs, victory in spite of all terror, victory however long and hard the road may be, for without victory there is no survival. "But I take up my task," said Churchill, "with buoyancy and hope, as we should. I feel sure that our cause will not fail. At this time I feel entitled to claim the aid of all, and I say, come then, let us go forward together with our united strength and defeat this terrorist enemy and defeat this evil of radical Islamic terrorism, and we cannot allow this scourge to continue to harm the world. And with the strength of the IDF, with the strength of the Jewish people, we will prevail, and this scourge will be defeated just as the Nazis were forevermore." Thank you very, very much.
To all our awardees, to all our guests of honor, to all our presenters, we thank you, we applaud you. God bless you, God bless America, and God bless the State of Israel.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.